Sharon asked about feature writing, and you're recording this, so she should be able to watch it later. And I I don't know if you had a chance to read the story that I sent you a link to last time, but it was the a story in the Monitor that was written. I thought was a pretty good story, and the reason I thought it was a pretty good story was because it was so well researched. If you look at this story, um, uh, okay, so we have this is the style of the Monitor. They have the what you need to know. And I think that's great. A little summary at the top. But then we get into his story, and here's the lead. One of the biggest contributors to the Consolidated Fund. I assume that's your tax fund or uh, a government fund. Paid so many shillings in taxes and fees, and by the end of this year, it's projected to be 160 billion in taxes. And so then it goes into 2,000 registered betting shops. The sector employs more than 10,000 Ugandans, positive economic contribution. Now, this is the lead of the story, and we all understand what the lead is. The lead is the first paragraph or the first couple of paragraphs, and this is the part that uh, in some stories pretty much contains the whole story. In other stories, it's what intrigues people or makes them want to read more. And it grabs their interest. And as much as I like this story for its research, this lead is boring. Okay. It's boring. And not only that, and this is a real skill you'll have to develop, is to learn the difference between background information and what's really important in a story. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how to punch up the lead. And then as we go down, um, there's a lot of stories in here. And then there's these uh, transitions. And in a long story like this, transitions are really important. And so we want to make sure we pay attention to those. And in some cases, he does a really good job of transitioning from one aspect of the story to the next. Um, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. Ditching the addiction, responsible gaming, lessons from other countries. So this is really a well-researched story. And then here's your ending. Okay. And I don't know what you think of this ending, but it basically trails off into um, nowhere. South Africa is the largest gambling market. Why would you end your story with that uh, when there's much better ways to do it? Okay. So that's the sort of my critique of this story. Let's talk about feature writing, and we'll come back to parts of this story in a minute. So feature articles, we're talking about news stories. And if you look at magazines, long form journalism, and if you look at this story, it's really a feature article. It's something that they would. What does that mean to feature something? It means it's something that you build your publication around. It's like a showcase article. Um, and lots of times in newspapers in this country or magazines in this country, they have special display for these uh, feature stories because they're the centerpiece of the publication. In a magazine, you'd probably have a two-page spread with some artwork and pictures, either photos or some other kind of artwork with it. And in a newspaper, it would be in the front page, and it would be set off in some way. And on the internet, you would have this at the top of your web page so that people will want to go to it with some special treatment. And so that's what we mean by featuring a story. So what makes a feature story, though, is that it's not just the facts. Straight news story, you're going to see basically a recitation of what happened, who, what, when, where, and um, sometimes how and sometimes why. But a lot of news stories are just who, what, when, where. Somebody got in a car accident Thursday out in the country somewhere. Uh, a narrative story has to go beyond that. It has to go to the how and the why of things, as well as sort of the who, what, when, and where. In fact, the the how and the why, uh, and the what are the keys to uh, a feature story. And it has to be compelling. And so this is where my criticism of the Monitor story comes in, is that the lead is not compelling. It doesn't make you feel like there's something there that should interest you as a human being. And uh, I think that's what's missing from the top of that story, the lead of that story. Now, a feature story takes an in-depth look at a subject, and our piece from the Monitor definitely does that well. It it covers many aspects of the uh, problem of gambling addiction, gambling itself, uh, keeps the reader's attention to the end. That's a tough part. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how he might punch that up a little bit, and then creates a lasting impression. And this is where I think he could do a better job too. Uh, and here's something to remember is that feature articles focus on people, because that's what we are. We're people. And so what makes a compelling story and what keeps our attention is the narrative about a person. A narrative is a story. It has an arc to it, beginning, middle, and end. And a feature article focuses on people to start out. Okay. So going back to the levels of research, and we talked in our last couple of meetings about um, different types of information. We'll repeat that here, but by now you're probably sick of hearing me talk about it. Interviews with people close to the story. If you read Walter's story in the Monitor, he has a lot of interviews, and that really punches up the story. You know, when you talk about a gambling addiction and then speak with um, a doctor at the university about it, and you quote that person, it and makes it um, authoritative. It connects people to the speaker. Uh, we we have a whole lecture on how to use quotations, and if Martin has the PDF of the book, our editing book, that would be a chapter that would pertain that you could benefit from, and that's how to use quotations, because they really do make the story human. And he does a good job of that. He has a lot of interviews, extensive background information. I would say in his story, he probably could cut that down a little bit. He's got so much background information that it's made the story extremely long, and parts of it are much too detailed for the average reader to be interested in. And then sharp powers of observation. We talked about this too, that you have to go uh, uh, describe things to people. And he does a little of that too. And it's effective when he does do it. So you want to go behind the scenes and uh, commit yourself to uncovering the story behind the facts. Okay. I always talk about feature stories as having the facts and then the idea behind the facts. Or another way to state it is the topic and then the theme. And so the topic might be gambling addiction, and the theme might be how this is a struggle for people's souls. You know, sort of a human theme behind it, not just a theme about uh, punters and tax income and so forth. Um, so, of course, the tips begin with do your research. I'm going to drive it home again. Even the most people-centered stories need data, and they need opinion, expert opinion. So it's where you get it from interviews or you get it from reading articles. You need quotes, anecdotes, viewpoints from interviews, and like I said, those add a lot of dimension to what's going on, and rich detail from observation. You want to include what we call relevant context. Relevant context means details that make a person feel like they're at the scene. When we take photos, for example, we tell our students you need to include, form your pictures so that you have those details. I see, and again, this is sort of a visual metaphor for it. I've had students come back from taking pictures of a person, And they put a nice background behind him, like you know, a floral setting or a wall or something. I said, where's the details that tell you what this person does for a living? Where's the, if it's a potter, where's the pottery wheel? You get, that's what we mean by that, by um, relevant context. And this is what you do with your observation, is that you talk about what a person's wearing, what do they look healthy? Do they look worse for wear? These are the kind of things that really bring a story to life. Now, Martin, you have these slides, so if the students want to review them,
Yeah,
you
I have
can.
I shared with them, Mike. I shared with them.
Yeah. Um, then you want to focus your story, and you know, I sent Martin this story form, and at the top of it it says, explain your summarize your story in 30 words or fewer. And if you wanted to do that for Walter's story, um, it would be difficult because it's so long. But if you did do that, it might bring you to focus on a better lead than what he has. You could summarize his story in that uh, gambling is here to stay in our society because of the money it raises, but it takes a terrible toll on those with gambling addiction. Okay, that would how you summarize your story. Now, when you focus on that and you include the fact that the idea about gambling addiction, then you might want to um, put that at the top. You know, who's addicted to gambling? What does that mean? And then write down the three most important questions the audience wants answered. And um, I would think that when you start reading this story, all the facts about tax income and number of punters and so forth might be one question. How widespread is gambling in our society? Um, but another one might be, what are the resources to help gamblers? And I think he includes that. He has quite a bit of that in the story. And um, uh, you know, come up with a third question. Okay. And then the zinger. And this is where we're going to talk about, I think, the major fault in Walter's story is that the lead, and you notice I spell it L-E-D-E, and that's an old American journalism uh, habit to uh, to make it clear that you're not talking about LEAD, um, which in the old days of journalism also meant lead, as in the lead they used to make the type for the newspapers. Oh, it goes way back. But anyway, this is not a misspelling. It's a habit. Okay, the lead should hook the audience in, and so the zinger is a sentence that makes the reader stop and say, "What?" or "Oh," or "Goodness," you know, something like that uh, that catches their interest. And there's the standard form in feature stories is to start with a person. So this I think this is probably the most important one of these tips is that if you're going to write a feature story, even about a subject like gambling and a gambling addiction, start with a person because that's what we are, and that'll humanize the story. But it's got to be somebody who illustrates what the story is about, and it should be clear about why the reader should care about this person. Okay, so let's look at a couple of leads. This is the lead Walter had on his story in blue. Okay, gaming is one of the biggest contributors to the consolidated fund. Last year, the sector paid 151 billion shillings in taxes and fees, and by the end of June this year, it is projected to contribute 160 billion shillings in taxes. Oh, there's no news in there. I mean, there's very little news in there, and mostly to work your way through that paragraph, uh, you have to have an intense interest in taxation. Okay, yeah. So here's a paragraph from down in the story. Fred Sasimpala's journey into the world of gaming began innocently enough, but soon spiraled out of control. So we started with a person, and it basically introduces um, uh, the idea of what the story is about, which is gambling addiction. Okay, let's go to the story itself here. Here's the original story. We'll go up to the top here. Okay, so here's the top, and then it gets into, in the second paragraph, it kind of gets into the idea of mental health of punters, and this is I think a British term for gamblers. And then he gets into a plush location in the outskirts of Kampala. A group of young men sit in a circle. Okay, all right. So then we go down, and young men peer into this, and then we get to this young man, Fred Sasampala, and but soon spiraled out of control. So right here, I am seeing what I call a buried lead. You know, like you bury a body. Okay, they bury the lead, the thing that really is going to catch interest, and he starts with background information. This is a I would say the most common problem I see in beginning writers is a lack of confidence in the reader. They feel like they have to tell them everything about the topic before they actually get to telling a story. Okay. Now the information in these first two paragraphs is important. In fact, I would say this is what we would call the nut graph. Okay, the nut graph is the part that clarifies and explains why we're interested in this story. Okay, so let's look at a different organization here. So we start out with Fred Sasampala's journey into the world of gaming began innocently enough, but soon spiraled out of control. Now, you know, I'm editing this story, and you'll notice that I'm using his words. I'm not making up any of my own words or really rewriting very much. It's pretty much his own words. I've moved some information around, but that's a different thing. So his journey into the world of gaming began innocently enough, but soon spiraled out of control. Now, right there, somebody's going to say, "Oh, really? Tell me more." And then we have a quote. I first heard about betting on the radio. I am an Arsenal Football Club fan, so one day, with 10,000 shillings in hand, I entered the betting hall in Boise. Is that how you say that, Boise?
He's wise.
See? Yeah. Sasampala realized his football bet would win only 12,000 shekels. Instead, he tried slot machines, and then he wins big on the slots. I was shocked. I realized I'd been wasting my time and energy working, yet here was free money to be made here. All right. So right now you're thinking, oh my God, Fred, hold it, Fred. You know, don't go there, Fred. Then, yeah, then on the next page, encouraged by his win, he increased his bet to 2,000 shillings and won 25,000 shillings, and he was hooked. So now we have this guy we're telling the story about, and now we need to explain why this is important. And so we take what was his lead and we make it into what I call the nut graph. Okay. The nut graph is what explains why we're telling you this story, why it affects not just Fred, but him, and so forth. So the nut graph is right here with 2,000 registered betting shops. The sector employs more than 10,000. However, this positive economic contribution is increasingly coming at the cost of the mental health of punters. Okay, that's what we call a nut graph. It takes the lead, and now it expands that lead into what the story is all about. Okay, so we're going to come back to the story in a minute. All right. So we'll go back up here, open with a zinger. So now we have that, and then connect the dots. The nut graph, and this is an old American journalism term, explains the importance of the story. And here we see the two paragraphs that I pointed out in the story about gaming is a big contributor to the taxes. It brought in a lot of money. There's 2,000 registered betting shops. There's 10,000 Ugandans employed, but it's costing people their mental health. And we already kind of showed that, well, here's Fred. He's hooked. What's going to happen to Fred? Okay. That's what's next. So connect the dots with the nut graph, and then connect the dots with the accordion. And the accordion is that part. I don't know if you guys play the accordion. I could go get one. I've got one, but it's that kind of instrument that you expands or contracts like this. And so the accordion in the story is where you need to connect the dots with the transitions. And we saw how he used transitions to move from one section of the story to another. So each change of scene should lead to one of your main points. And we saw that too in his story, where each transition, online gaming, recovering from addiction, uh, perspective from other countries, each one was a main point. And uh, uh, and putting the story together, and then make sure the ending pays off. So the ending ties up the story in a satisfying way. And one way to do that is to create an echo. And so go back to your lead and say, okay, how can I sort of wrap this up and reflect uh, what was in the lead to sort of put a nice topping on it, or a bow on it, as we say. And lots of times, and this is a really good tip, a good quotation that reflects the opening paragraph ties up the story. So if you have a lot of interview stuff, especially with your main person, in this case Fred Sesapala, if you have if you have a lot of quotes from him, save a good quote for the end, and that can reflect back to the top of the story. Okay. So here's the last paragraph of the story before I edited it. Okay. South Africa is the largest gambling market in Africa, despite regulations, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Uh, and it just sort of like, okay, this is so unimportant that it's at the end. And if you made it to the end, then here you go. There's nothing really here for you. It's sort of that approach to it. So here's the way I would end the story. And that's with a quote from Fred. I know there is a law to regulate gaming, but it does not work. The people I was with in gaming shops, playing the slot machines, we were as young as 15 years. The addicts who sleep in these shops are between 19 and 23 years old. Putting the age limit at 25 years ends in the adverts. Okay, now you know what I'm talking about here. I request whoever responsible to place more posters with helplines in the betting shop. So there's a quote that kind of ends on the topic, and that is gambling addiction in Uganda, not South Africa. Okay. If we go back to the stories, again, if we go down to the bottom here, we can see that that's his last paragraph. And the quote I got that quote from uh, somewhere in here. Let's see, where was it? I can't find him. I can't find it. I took it from somewhere up high in the story and moved it down to the end, so that the end of the story now reads like this. Okay, just ditching the addiction. So we're going to end with that section, ditching the addiction, because this brings you back to Fred and tells about what he was doing. When Sensapala became suicidal, he began blaming the government for its laxity about abolishing betting shops. I was happy when betting. Let's see here. I went down too fast. I was happy when betting shops were closed during the COVID-19 lockdowns. I thought I had finally ditched the habit. You can imagine my dismay when I found myself using my phone to search for online betting companies. That is when I understood that I was the problem, not the government. One day, he noticed a poster on the wall of a betting shop. The poster had a toll-free helpline that clients could call if they noticed they were addicted to gambling. I called the number, and the person in line invited me to a counseling session. My first question was, will I ever be free of addiction? Uh, the counselor asked me if I accepted that I was sick and I needed help. I was so tired of trying to fight the addiction on my own. So I admitted I was sick and needed help. So now we end with this. It's now 5 months since Sensapala last placed a bet. Now you remember the lead. We said that he uh, uh, he went into the gambling shop and he got hooked. And so now here in the end, we tell people Here's what happened. Here's the outcome for Fred Sasampala. And so this gives them something to keep reading about. What about Fred? How did this affect Fred? And